The screen froze on a single line item in the quarterly financial report. Negative variance, $1,042,000. The number glowed on the projector at the front of the boardroom. Impossible to ignore. Impossible to explain away. For 3 seconds nobody spoke. Then my boss, Nathan Cross, didn't even hesitate. He turned in his chair, pointed directly at me across the conference table, and said in a voice that carried absolute certainty, that approval came from her. The room went dead silent. I felt heat rush to my face as every executive at the table turned to stare at me like I'd just detonated a bomb in the middle of the company's financial foundation. The CFO's expression hardened. The compliance officer leaned forward, eyes narrowed. The board representative reached for her notepad. My throat tightened until I could barely breathe. My hands gripped the edge of the table so hard my knuckles turned white. I opened my mouth to defend myself, to explain that I hadn't approved that transaction, that I would never bypass the protocols I'd spent years building. But before I could speak, Nathan continued, his voice smooth and regretful. I've been concerned about some shortcuts in the approval process. This confirms my worst fears. I hadn't approved that transaction. I knew I hadn't. Nathan knew I hadn't. And still, he let his accusation land on me, heavy and damning, while the entire executive team watched. Before I could get a single word out, before I could defend myself or demand to see the approval trail, the HR director spoke from the end of the table. Brooke, we'll need to secure your system access immediately while we investigate this matter. Her voice was professional, neutral, but the implication was clear. I was being treated as a security risk. My laptop was still open in front of me, showing the same financial dashboard everyone else could see. The IT director, who'd been sitting quietly in the corner, stood and walked toward me. I'll need your laptop, your phone, and your badge. My boss sat back in his chair, arms crossed over his chest, watching like this was inevitable. Like he'd predicted this exact outcome. Like I was a problem he'd finally solved. My hands shook as I closed my laptop and slid it across the table to IT. I unclipped my security badge from my blazer and placed it next to the computer. Everyone was watching me, judging me, convicting me based on Nathan's single accusation. Inside something snapped. Not panic. I'd expected some version of this confrontation eventually. Not fear. I'd been preparing for months without fully realizing why. What snapped was the last thread of trust, the final piece of doubt about what Nathan was capable of. And in its place came something else entirely. Clarity. Crystal clear, ice-cold clarity about exactly what was happening and exactly what I needed to do. The words formed in my mind, sharp and certain, as I gathered my things and stood from the conference table. My boss framed me for $1 million mistake. I let the investigation conclude first. The phrase repeated like a mantra as I walked out of the boardroom, shoulders squared despite the humiliation burning behind my eyes. Past the executives who wouldn't meet my gaze. Past the compliance officer already pulling up audit logs on her tablet. Past Nathan, who had the audacity to look concerned, like he was sorry this was happening but powerless to stop it. I knew better. This wasn't something happening to me. This was something he'd orchestrated, carefully and deliberately. As I walked down the hallway toward the elevator, badgeless and laptopless and officially suspended pending investigation, I repeated those words to myself. Not as a victim. Not as someone planning revenge. But as someone who understood that the truth had its own timeline, its own process, its own power. And my job now wasn't to fight. It was to wait. To let the investigation run its course. To trust that the safeguards I'd put in place months ago, the ones Nathan didn't know about, would do exactly what they were designed to do. The elevator doors opened. I stepped inside. And I let myself feel, just for one moment, the absolute certainty that I was going to be fine. Because the truth doesn't need me to defend it. Just needs time to be discovered. My name is Brooke Castellano, and until that morning, I'd been a financial operations manager at Caldwell Ridge Capital, a mid-sized investment firm managing portfolios for high-net-worth clients. I'd worked there for 6 years, building my way up from junior analyst to manager. My job was oversight, compliance flow, and risk controls. The invisible infrastructure work that only gets noticed when something goes catastrophically wrong. I handled approval protocols for large transactions, made sure regulatory requirements were met, built systems to prevent exactly the kind of million-dollar variance that had just been displayed on that boardroom screen. I wasn't flashy. I didn't schmooze with clients or present at investor meetings. I worked behind the scenes, making sure the numbers added up, the processes held, the controls worked. I was trusted. Or at least I thought I was. Nathan Cross had been my direct supervisor for 18 months. He'd come to Caldwell Ridge from a larger firm, brought in to modernize operations and increase efficiency. From day one, his approach had been to speed things up, cut through bureaucracy, move money faster. My approach had been to make sure speed didn't compromise security. We'd clashed quietly, professionally, but constantly. And now, sitting in the back of an Uber driving me home at 10:30 in the morning on a Tuesday, suspended and publicly accused, I understood that our professional disagreement had become something else entirely. It had become war. And he'd just fired the first shot. As I'd walked out of the boardroom, I'd passed Nathan's office. The door was open, and I'd caught his reflection in the glass wall, that distinctive floor-to-ceiling window he loved because it let him see the entire operations floor. He was standing with his back to the hallway, phone pressed to his ear, and I could see his face in the reflection. Relieved. Almost satisfied. Not the expression of someone who'd just discovered a million-dollar error. Not the face of a manager dealing with a crisis caused by an employee he'd trusted. That was the expression of someone who'd just successfully executed a plan. That single glimpse, that 2-second look at his reflected face, told me everything I needed to know. This wasn't a mistake someone had discovered. This wasn't an unfortunate error Nathan had been forced to report. This was deliberate, calculated, planned. He hadn't found a problem and incorrectly blamed me. He'd created a problem and strategically framed me for it. The question wasn't whether I'd been set up. The question was why. And more importantly, what was I going to do about it? As the Uber pulled up to my apartment building, I already knew the answer. Nothing. Least nothing visible. Nothing dramatic. I was going to do exactly what I'd told myself in that elevator. Let the investigation conclude. Because I had something Nathan didn't know about. Something I'd put in place months ago when my instincts first started screaming that something was wrong. The warning signs had started appearing 4 months earlier, in late January. Nathan had leaned over my desk one afternoon. His tie loosened and his sleeves rolled up in that calculated casual way executives use to seem approachable. "Brooke, we need to talk about approval bottlenecks." I'd looked up from the compliance report I was reviewing. What bottlenecks? Large transaction approvals are taking too long. Clients are complaining. We're losing opportunities because we can't move fast enough. The approval process takes exactly as long as the regulatory requirements dictate, I'd responded carefully. We're actually faster than industry standard. Industry standard isn't good enough anymore. We need to innovate. Find ways to streamline. Streamline within compliance parameters, sure. But we can't shortcut the protocols. That's how you end up with errors. Or worse. Nathan's smile had tightened. Still polite on the surface, but something cold underneath. Something that made my stomach clench with warning. I'm not asking you to break rules, Brooke. I'm asking you to be flexible. Don't bottleneck progress for the sake of bureaucracy. I'd held his gaze. The protocols exist for a reason. They protect the company. They also slow us down. He'd straightened, adjusting his tie. Just think about it. We're a team. We need to move together. He'd walked away then, and I'd sat at my desk feeling like I'd just failed some kind of test I hadn't known I was taking. That same week, after the conversation about flexibility, I'd made a decision. Not because I distrusted Nathan specifically, or at least not consciously, but because something in his tone, in his push for speed over security, had activated every professional instinct I'd developed in 15 years of financial operations work. I'd quietly logged into the system administration panel and activated enhanced audit logging. Caldwell Ridge's standard audit trail captured major approvals and transactions, but it had optional advanced features that most managers never bothered with because they generated massive amounts of data. I turned on detailed access logging, which recorded not just what transactions were approved but who accessed the approval system, when, from which device, using which credentials. I enabled override tracking, which flagged any time someone bypassed standard approval workflows. I activated timestamp precision down to the second, not just the minute. And I set up automatic email notifications to my personal account, not my work email, anytime a large transaction was processed outside normal business hours or without following standard protocols. I told myself I was just being thorough, protecting the system, maintaining good governance practices. But deep down I knew I was protecting myself. From what I wasn't entirely sure yet. From Nathan's pressure to cut corners. From some future accusation that I'd been careless. I didn't know. I just knew my instincts were screaming, and I'd learned to listen to them. After being suspended, I was escorted out of the building by security. Not dramatically, not in handcuffs or anything like that, but the message was clear. I was being treated as a potential threat. Someone who might damage systems or destroy evidence if left unsupervised. I walked through the lobby past coworkers who suddenly found their phones very interesting. Past the reception desk where Valerie, who'd greeted me cheerfully every morning for 6 years, looked away. Past the glass doors into the parking garage. Nobody defended me. Nobody asked questions. Nobody said, "Wait, there must be some mistake. Brooke wouldn't do this." I'd worked there for 6 years, built systems that protected millions of dollars, stayed late countless nights to ensure compliance, and in one morning, one accusation from my boss, I'd become a security risk to be removed. I drove home gripping the steering wheel so hard my fingers ached. The radio was off. The silence was absolute except for the sound of my own breathing and the hum of tires on asphalt. I kept repeating one truth over and over. I didn't do this. I didn't approve that transaction. I didn't bypass the protocols I'd spent years building. I didn't make that $1 million mistake. The truth was simple and absolute. Now I just had to trust that the investigation would find it. That first night I barely slept. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, replaying every email exchange with Nathan from the past 6 months. Every conversation about streamlining approvals. Every time he'd pushed for faster processing. Every moment where he'd seemed frustrated by my insistence on following protocols. Had I missed something? Some sign that he was planning this? Or had I seen the signs and just not understood what they meant? Around 3 a.m, exhausted but wired, I got up and opened my laptop. Not my work laptop. That was sitting in some evidence locker at Caldwell Ridge. My personal laptop. I logged into my personal email and searched for the automated notifications I'd set up 4 months ago. There were dozens of them. Most were routine, legitimate after-hours approvals with proper documentation, emergency transactions that followed override protocols correctly. But then I found it. An alert from 11 days ago. Transaction approval processed at 12:47 a.m. Override authorization used. Standard approval workflow bypassed. Approving party. Nathan Cross. My breathing slowed. My heart rate dropped from panicked racing to focused calm. This was it. This was the evidence. The logs. The timestamps. The proof that I hadn't approved that transaction. Nathan had. And he'd done it using override credentials that should have triggered a compliance review but somehow hadn't. I wasn't helpless. I was prepared. I just had to be patient. The next morning, Caldwell Ridge's compliance officer called. Her name was Simone Washington and we'd worked together for years. She'd always been professional, thorough, and absolutely impartial when it came to investigations. "Brooke," she said when I answered, her voice carefully neutral. "I'm calling to let you know we'll be conducting a full review of system access histories and transaction approvals for the past 6 months." "I understand," I replied, keeping my voice equally neutral. "I'm available to answer any questions you have." We'll need formal statements. We'll be reviewing all communications, all audit logs, all approval records. Of course, I'll cooperate fully with the investigation. What I didn't say. I understand that you're going to find exactly what I already know is there. What I didn't say. The enhanced logging I activated will show you things you didn't even know you could track. What I didn't say. Take all the time you need. The evidence isn't going anywhere. Brooke, Simone said, her tone shifting slightly. I want you to know this is a standard process. We're not assuming anything. We're just following procedure. I know, I said. And I meant something entirely different. I know the procedure will clear me. I know you're good at your job. I know the truth always comes out when you look carefully enough. We hung up, and I sat in my silent apartment, suspended and publicly accused and somehow absolutely certain that everything was going to be okay. 2 days after my suspension, Nathan sent a company-wide email. I didn't see it directly. My work email had been deactivated, but 3 former colleagues forwarded it to me, their messages ranging from supportive, "This is BS," to cautiously neutral, "Thought you should know." The email was a masterpiece of corporate messaging. Nathan never used my name. He never directly accused anyone. He just wrote about the importance of learning from costly errors, about how even experienced professionals can make mistakes under pressure, about the need for renewed vigilance in our approval processes. He didn't have to name me. Everyone knew. The implication did all the damage. He positioned himself as the concerned leader addressing a crisis, as someone saddened but not surprised by human fallibility, as the voice of wisdom and accountability. Reading his words, I felt rage burn through me like acid. Not because he'd framed me, I'd expected that, but because of how easily he lied. How smoothly he performed concern while knowing exactly what he'd done. How confidently he destroyed my reputation while presenting himself as the solution to the problem he'd created. But I didn't respond. I didn't fire off an angry email to colleagues defending myself. I didn't post anything on social media. I didn't call Nathan and scream at him. I did nothing. Because emotional reactions are what guilty people do. Innocent people wait for the evidence. And I had evidence he didn't even know existed. The auditors arrived at Caldwell Ridge 3 days into my suspension. Not internal auditors. The company had brought in an external forensic accounting firm to review the transaction. This was serious. $1 million variances got serious attention. I knew they'd be thorough. Methodical. Exactly what I needed. Simone called to let me know they'd need to interview me. When and where? Yes. Their offices downtown. Tomorrow at 10. Is that okay? I'll be there. Brooke, I want you to know, she paused, choosing words carefully, that we're reviewing everything. Not just the transaction in question. We're looking at access patterns, workflow compliance, authorization trails. Good, I said simply. That's exactly what you should be doing. The next day, I dressed in my most professional outfit and arrived at the forensic accounting firm's offices 15 minutes early. The lead auditor was a woman named Pauline Reeves, mid-50s, gray hair pulled back severely, the kind of expression that suggested she'd seen every type of financial fraud and wasn't impressed by any of it. She walked me through their process. They were requesting documentation, access logs, email communications, timeline reconstructions. I'll provide everything you need, I told her. I have nothing to hide. And I didn't. I provided every email, every memo, every documentation of my approval processes. I answered every question thoroughly, precisely, without embellishment. Facts don't need emotion to be sharp. The truth doesn't need decoration to be powerful. I just had to present it clearly and let it do its work. During my second interview with the auditors, Pauline asked a question that made my heart rate spike with vindication. Can you explain why the approval override occurred at 12:47 a.m. on May 3rd? Her eyes were on me, sharp and assessing. I didn't answer immediately. I could have said, because Nathan processed it then. I could have said, Because someone used override credentials I don't have access to. But I didn't. I simply said, I can't explain that. I wasn't working at 12:47 a.m. on May 3rd. I was home asleep. My work computer was logged off and physically in my apartment. Can you prove that? My building has security cameras with timestamps. My computer has activity logs. My internet router has connection records. All of that will show I wasn't accessing company systems at that time. Pauline made a note. The transaction approval shows an override authorization that bypasses standard workflow protocols. Can you explain that? No, I said calmly. Because I didn't authorize any override. I don't use override credentials. I built the approval system specifically to prevent shortcuts and ensure compliance. Using an override would contradict everything I've worked to establish. Another note. Who has access to override credentials? According to the system documentation, only senior management with specific authorization. That would include the CFO, the head of compliance, and department directors. Including your direct supervisor? Including Nathan Cross, yes. I didn't elaborate. I didn't have to. The question itself was already revealing where the investigation was heading. I heard through the grapevine, former colleagues who were still talking to me, that Nathan's story kept changing. First he claimed urgency. The transaction had to be processed immediately for a time-sensitive client opportunity. Then he claimed delegation. He'd asked me to handle it and assumed I'd followed proper procedures. Then he claimed miscommunication. He'd thought I was getting proper approvals. I'd thought he'd already gotten them. Every version contradicted the last. Each explanation raised more questions than it answered. Meanwhile, I stayed suspended. Days turned into a week. Then 2 weeks. I spent my time at home, not wallowing but preparing. I organized every piece of documentation I had. I reviewed audit procedures. I researched forensic accounting methods. I wanted to understand exactly how the investigation would unfold, exactly what evidence they'd look for, exactly what questions they'd ask. Friends checked in. My mother called daily, worried and angry. Sue them, she kept saying. This is defamation. This is wrongful suspension. Get a lawyer. Not yet, I replied calmly. Let the investigation finish. But you're just sitting here letting them destroy your reputation. Mom, the truth doesn't care about timing. Cares about evidence. And the evidence is on my side. Letting truth work is an act of patience. It's the hardest thing in the world when you're desperate to fight back, to defend yourself, to make people understand. But sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is wait. The breakthrough came during week 3 of my suspension. I was making coffee in my apartment when my phone rang. Simone from compliance. Brooke, can you come in tomorrow? The board wants to meet with you. My stomach tightened. Am I being terminated? No, Simone said, and I heard something in her voice. Not quite relief, but something close. The investigation has made significant progress. They want to discuss the findings. What findings? I can't discuss that over the phone. But Brooke, she paused. Bring your lawyer if you want one. This is a formal presentation of investigation results. I didn't have a lawyer. I didn't need one. What time? 10 a.m. Conference room B. The next morning, I dressed even more carefully than I had for the auditor interviews. Professional but not defensive. Confident but not arrogant. I arrived 15 minutes early and was escorted not to some side office but to the main boardroom. The same boardroom where Nathan had pointed at me 3 weeks ago and destroyed my reputation in front of the executive team. But this time my chair was at the table. Not outside the door waiting to be called in. Not in the corner as an afterthought. At the table, with a name placard and a glass of water, and all the dignity of someone whose presence was required and respected. The board members filtered in. CFO, the head of HR. Simone from compliance. Pauline Reeves from the forensic accounting firm. And Nathan. He walked in last, and when he saw me sitting at the table, His confident stride faltered just slightly. Pauline Reeves opened the meeting. She had a presentation loaded, and she didn't waste time with pleasantries. We've completed our forensic analysis of the transaction in question, along with a comprehensive review of system access patterns and approval workflows. Our findings are conclusive. The first slide showed the transaction details: date, time, amount, account numbers. The million-dollar variance that had started everything. The second slide showed the approval trail. Not the simplified version Nathan had presented 3 weeks ago, but the detailed, timestamp-precise, credential-verified version that the enhanced logging had captured. The transaction was approved at 12:47 a.m. on May 3 using override authorization credentials, Pauline stated, her voice flat and factual. The approval bypassed standard workflow protocols that required dual authorization for transactions over $500,000. Nathan shifted in his seat. The override was used because of client urgency. Mr. Cross, Pauline interrupted, not looking at him. Please hold your comments until we've completed the presentation. The room went still. The next slide showed system access logs. Device IDs, IP addresses, credential usage. The approval was executed from a device registered to Nathan Cross, using credentials issued to Nathan Cross, from an IP address that traces to Mr. Cross's home network. Nathan's face had gone pale. The enhanced audit logging activated in January, Pauline continued, and I saw her glance at me briefly. Captured detailed access patterns that standard logging would have missed. She clicked to the next slide. My name didn't appear anywhere on it. Nathan's name appeared 7 times. The board session continued for another hour. Pauline presented slide after slide of evidence, each one more damning than the last. Timeline reconstructions showing I'd been offline when the transaction was approved. Email analysis showing I'd never been informed about the supposed urgent client need. System logs proving I didn't have access to the override credentials that had been used. And then, the slide that made Nathan's face go from pale to gray. During our comprehensive review, Pauline said, we identified a pattern of similar transactions over the past 8 months. The screen showed a table. 6 transactions. Smaller amounts, 20,000 here, 50,000 there. But all processed the same way. After hours. Using override credentials. Bypassing dual authorization requirements. And every single one traced back to the same credentials, the same device, the same user. Nathan Cross. These weren't isolated mistakes, Pauline stated. This was a consistent pattern of authorization protocol violations. The million-dollar transaction that triggered this investigation was simply larger than the others and created a variance that couldn't be overlooked. The CFO leaned forward, staring at Nathan. You've been bypassing our approval controls for 8 months. These were all legitimate, Nathan started. They were all unauthorized, Pauline corrected. And at least 3 of them appear to have violated client investment guidelines. He tried to interrupt again. The board chair, a woman named Victoria Chen, shut him down with a single raised hand. Mr. Cross, you'll have an opportunity to respond. Right now we're reviewing findings. He turned to me. Ms. Castellano, did you have any knowledge of these override approvals? No, I said clearly. I designed the system specifically to prevent unauthorized overrides. If I'd known they were happening, I would have reported them immediately. Victoria nodded. She looked at Simone. Compliance review. Simone pulled up her own presentation. Compliance conducted parallel interviews with all personnel who have access to override credentials. We also reviewed policy documentation and training records. She clicked to her first slide. Brooke Castellano's training records show she completed advanced compliance certification in March. Her system access logs show she has never used override credentials. Her email communications consistently emphasize the importance of following proper approval workflows. Next slide. Nathan Cross's communications show repeated emphasis on streamlining approvals and increasing efficiency. Multiple employees reported feeling pressure to expedite transactions without proper documentation. Simone looked directly at Nathan. 3 employees reported that you asked them to find ways to work around bottlenecks in the approval process. 2 documented these requests in writing specifically because they were concerned about compliance implications. Nathan's jaw clenched. That's taken out of context. I was trying to improve efficiency. By bypassing controls that exist for regulatory compliance and risk management, the CFO interrupted. By using override credentials that are supposed to be reserved for genuine emergencies. The client situations were urgent. We contacted the clients, Pauline cut in. None of them requested after-hours processing. None of them were aware their transactions had been handled outside normal protocols. In fact, 2 expressed concern when we explained what had happened. The evidence wasn't just clearing me. It was building an airtight case that Nathan had been systematically violating protocols for months, and the $1 million variance was just the mistake that finally exposed his pattern. Victoria looked at the full board. I want to be absolutely clear about what we've found here. Ms. Castellano was publicly accused of a major compliance failure. She was suspended. Her professional reputation was damaged. He turned to me. And none of it was true. I didn't respond. I just waited. The investigation shows conclusively that Brooke not only didn't commit the error she was accused of, but that she actually built the systems that ultimately exposed what was really happening. Victoria's expression was serious. The enhanced audit logging she implemented in January, apparently as a routine improvement to our compliance infrastructure, is the only reason we were able to trace these transactions back to their actual source. She looked at Nathan. Mr. Cross, this investigation has uncovered not just the $1 million variance but a pattern of protocol violations that put the company at significant regulatory risk. We found at least 6 unauthorized override approvals, 3 violations of client investment guidelines, and evidence that you deliberately misrepresented the approval process to clients and to your own team. I was trying to help the company compete. Nathan started. You were cutting corners, the CFO said flatly. And when your corner cutting created a problem too big to hide, you blamed your subordinate. The person who'd been telling you all along that these shortcuts were dangerous. Victoria pulled out a formal document. The investigation's conclusion is unambiguous. No fault attributed to Brooke Castellano. Her suspension is lifted effective immediately. Her record will be formally amended to reflect that she was wrongly accused. My chest loosened for the first time in 3 weeks. Victoria continued, her voice formal and final. Nathan Cross is placed on immediate administrative leave pending termination review. Given the severity and pattern of the violations, along with the attempt to blame another employee, our preliminary decision is termination for cause. Nathan stood abruptly. This is ridiculous. I've been with this company for 18 months. I've brought in millions in new business. One process disagreement and you're destroying my career. This isn't one disagreement, Victoria replied coldly. This is systematic protocol violation, regulatory risk exposure, client guideline violations, and fraud. You framed an innocent employee for your mistakes. Security is waiting outside to escort you to your office to collect personal items. You can't do this. I have an employment contract, which includes termination for cause provisions. I suggest you contact your attorney. Victoria nodded to the door, where 2 security officers had appeared. Nathan looked around the table, searching for support. Nobody met his eyes. Finally, his gaze landed on me. I looked back steadily, saying nothing. I didn't gloat. I didn't smile. I didn't say I told you so or I knew it, or any of the things I could have said. I just looked at him with the same professional neutrality I'd maintained throughout this entire ordeal. He wouldn't look at me for more than a second. His eyes slid away like he couldn't bear to face what he'd tried to destroy and failed. Security escorted him from the boardroom. The door closed behind him with a heavy click. And just like that, it was over. After Nathan left, Victoria turned to me with an expression that was difficult to read. Ms. Castellano, on behalf of Caldwell Ridge Capital and the board, I want to offer you a formal apology. I nodded, waiting. You were treated unjustly. You were publicly accused, immediately suspended, and subjected to intensive investigation for something you not only didn't do, but couldn't have done given your system access limitations. Pause. Worse, you were framed by someone who should have been supporting you. That's unacceptable, and the company bears responsibility for allowing it to happen. The CFO spoke next. Your suspension is lifted, obviously. You'll receive full back pay for the 3 weeks you were out. Your personnel record will be corrected to show no performance issues, and we'll provide written documentation of the investigation's conclusions for your future reference. Additionally, Victoria continued, we'd like to offer you an expanded role. Nathan's position needs to be filled, but more importantly, we need to restructure our operations oversight to prevent this from happening again. She slid a document across the table. We're offering you the position of Director of Financial Compliance and Controls, with direct reporting access to the CFO and the board. You'd have expanded authority to implement the kind of rigorous protocols you've been advocating for. I looked at the document, the title adjustment, the salary increase, the authority I'd never asked for but had apparently earned the hard way, through being wrongly accused and letting the investigation prove my integrity. This is visibility I never sought, I said carefully. Victoria nodded. The best compliance officers never seek visibility. But after this situation, the board agrees we need someone in a senior position who prioritizes protection over speed. Someone who builds systems that work even when people try to circumvent them. I thought about it for exactly 10 seconds. Then I said, I accept. My first day back at Caldwell Ridge felt surreal. I walked through the same lobby where I'd been escorted out 3 weeks earlier, but this time I had a new badge with an updated title. Director of Financial Compliance and Controls. The security guard at the front desk, the same one who'd logged my badge when I was suspended, looked up and actually smiled. Welcome back, Ms. Castellano. Congratulations on the promotion. Word had spread. Of course it had. In a company of 200 people, an investigation that resulted in a department director being fired and a manager being promoted to director was headline news. People I passed in the hallways met my eyes now. Some nodded. Some said congratulations. A few looked guilty, like they were ashamed they hadn't defended me when Nathan first made his accusations. I didn't hold grudges. I understood the dynamics of workplace politics, how quickly people align with power, how scary it is to defend someone who's been publicly accused. I just took note of who had supported me and who hadn't. That information would be useful in the future. Nathan's office, my office now, had been completely cleared out. New furniture ordered. The floor-to-ceiling windows that had given him a view of the entire operations floor now gave me the same view. But I would use it differently. Not to watch for problems to blame on others, but to watch for problems to solve before they became crises. My first meeting as director was with my old team, the analysts and managers who'd watched me get suspended 3 weeks ago. They filed into the conference room looking nervous. I'm not going to pretend the past few weeks didn't happen, I said directly. We all know what occurred. Nathan framed me. The investigation proved it. He's gone. I'm back with a new title and new authority. Here's what's going to change, I continued, looking at each member of my team. We're implementing mandatory audit logging across all major financial systems. Not optional, not something we turn on when we're worried. Standard practice, always on, always tracking. One of the senior analysts, Marcus, spoke up. That's going to generate massive amounts of data. Who's reviewing it? Automated systems will flag anomalies. But yes, someone will review patterns regularly. That's part of the expanded compliance role. It seems like a lot of overhead for one mistake, another analyst started. It wasn't one mistake, I interrupted gently. The investigation found at least 6 similar transactions over 8 months. This was a pattern, not an anomaly. And the only reason we caught it was because I'd implemented enhanced logging months ago, before I even knew there was a problem. I paused, making sure everyone understood. Good compliance doesn't wait for problems. Prevents them. And when problems do occur despite our best efforts, Good compliance provides the evidence to understand what actually happened. Over the next few weeks, I implemented changes Nathan had blocked for months. Mandatory dual authorization for all transactions over $500,000. No exceptions. Automatic compliance reviews for any after-hours processing. Strict limitations on who could access override credentials, with automatic board notification anytime they were used. The CFO supported everything. The board approved every proposal. I had the authority I'd needed all along, earned through the worst possible experience but earned nonetheless. 3 months after the investigation concluded, Caldwell Ridge received its annual regulatory audit. We passed with the highest compliance rating we'd ever achieved. The auditors specifically noted our exceptional control environment and audit trail documentation. 6 months after my suspension and Nathan's termination, I was invited to speak at a financial compliance conference. The topic was building resilient control systems in high-pressure environments. I almost declined. Public speaking wasn't my strength, and talking about what happened felt like reopening wounds that had finally healed. But the conference organizer said something that changed my mind. People need to hear from someone who stood up for proper protocols even when it cost them something. Even when they were punished for it. So I accepted. I stood in front of 300 compliance officers, risk managers, and financial professionals, and I told them what happened. Not as a victim, but as someone who'd survived by trusting the system she'd built. I didn't confront my boss when he pressured me to shortcut protocols, I explained. I didn't engage in a power struggle or try to win an argument. I just quietly implemented safeguards that I hoped I'd never need. The audience was completely silent, leaning forward. When he framed me for his mistakes, I didn't fight back publicly. I didn't defend myself aggressively. I just cooperated with the investigation and trusted that the evidence would speak for itself. I paused, looking out at faces that understood the pressure, the fear, the temptation to either cave to demands or fight back emotionally. The truth doesn't need me to be loud. It needs me to be thorough. Documentation isn't about distrust. It's about protection. For yourself, for your company, for the integrity of the systems we build. The applause afterward felt earned, real. After my presentation, people approached me with their own stories. Managers who'd been pressured to cut corners. Analysts who'd been blamed for others' mistakes. Compliance officers fighting to implement proper controls despite resistance from leadership. "How did you stay calm?" one woman asked. "I would have panicked. I would have fought back immediately. I was prepared," I said simply. Not because I knew exactly what would happen, but because I'd built systems that would protect the truth even if I couldn't defend myself. Looking back now, a year after that boardroom accusation, I've learned something important about workplace justice. Revenge isn't confrontation. It isn't dramatic showdowns or angry speeches or public humiliation of the person who wronged you. Revenge, if you can even call it that, is documentation. It's preparation. It's building systems that work even when people try to break them. Nathan Cross framed me for $1 million mistake, believing that pressure and panic would make me break. That I'd be too scared or too disorganized to defend myself effectively. That his position and confidence would overwhelm my quiet competence. He was wrong about all of it. I didn't break because I didn't have to fight. The evidence fought for me. The audit logs spoke for me. The systems I'd built months before I even knew I was in danger protected me when I needed protection most. I learned that the most powerful thing you can do when you're falsely accused isn't to shout louder or fight harder. It's to stay calm. Cooperate fully. Trust the process you've built. And let the investigation conclude. Because the truth has its own timeline, its own power, its own voice. It doesn't need you to defend it dramatically. It just needs you to document it thoroughly and give it time to be discovered. Nathan thought he could rewrite reality by pointing at me in that boardroom. He thought his authority and confidence would make his lie the truth. But reality doesn't care about authority. Cares about evidence. And the evidence did exactly what it was designed to do. It told the truth, even when I couldn't speak. Even when I was suspended and silenced and publicly convicted. The truth waited patiently in server logs and timestamps and audit trails until someone looked closely enough to find it. And when they did, it spoke with perfect clarity. I didn't win by destroying Nathan. I won by building systems he couldn't destroy. I didn't win by fighting back. I won by trusting that preparation, documentation, and patience would be enough. And they were. They always are. When the truth is on your side, all you have to do is give it time to be found.